Welcome back. News out late yesterday that Trian, of course, the very well-known activist-focused fund, had taken a position in our parent company, Comcast, helped to stabilize, if not send those shares higher from what had been a significantly down day. They did move up towards the end of the day. You can see regaining a bit of ground. The stock had been as high as 47, though, a few days ago before the market's overall downturn. What can we tell you about this? Of course, Trian is set to own about 0.4%. Dollar-wise, still a fairly significant sum, though, as a percentage, of course, quite small, given Comcast is a more than $200 billion market cap company. The focus here, listen, they're not sharing at Trian very much. They don't want to make this play out in the media, at least not at this point. You never know when that might choose to be the case. But their focus is on what at least many people might be expected to focus on, the divergence in multiples that a broadband company such as Charter gets versus an entertainment company. And, of course, Comcast comprises both. It's got a significant broadband presence in this country, as our viewers well know, of course. And when you look at the performance of Comcast versus Charter, you can understand some investors would say, well, wait a second, why can't you throw a multiple that Charter's getting on the broadband business? Put the Disney multiple on the rest of the business, and, man, you get a much higher stock price. But will Brian Roberts do anything to actually try and address that? Listen, He's a long-term guy, and he's a very aggressive guy, as we all know, and as we've seen through the many deals that Comcast has engineered for many years, of course, the most recent of which was Sky. Now, that was a high price that was paid for Sky, and given the pandemic and given what's happened to theme parks and given what's happened to movie theaters, and we can go through all of it, of course, the company overall has seen EBITDA come down. The leverage ratio remains fairly high. None of that means that Brian Roberts is going to in any way entertain the idea of potentially splitting the company at this point. And even if that were to potentially even be the slightest thought in his mind, my understanding is he would always want to have the same voting control for the Roberts family that they currently have. And that gets us back to the key point here. 33.5%. That's what it is, Jim. Roberts controls 33.5% of the votes at Comcast. You're not going to get anything done. Certainly not in an unfriendly way, and not in any way, most likely. You can talk. You can have a conversation, as Trian and Comcast have. You can keep it very civil. And by the way, you might even be able to sort of agree on certain things in terms of how do you go about proving the sort of broadband multiple more. Would you ever consider doing some things down the road? But take a look at the long term there, Jim. That's still value creation over a long period of time. And that's what Brian Roberts is going to argue and doesn't even need to when you have 33.5% votes.
Yeah, in full fairness, I own a lot of stock, and I have to say that. I will say that, is there a lot of synergy between some of the pieces? Well, I mean, maybe it would go up if you separate it, but why not go after companies that do badly? I've never been a big believer in going after companies and rattling the cage, particularly ones where they're not going to do anything, that have done well. And, I was a believer in Sky, David. Yeah. And I still am. I mean, look, there's a pandemic. Who knows what the heck's going on with people? But they made a bold move. And so far, they said that the stock would go down and then it would have a big run. And that's exactly what happened. So why go against someone that actually had a plan? Plan's working.
Yeah. Listen, Sky was as you well know, as we all, I covered it every day, every minute, was a robust auction, and Comcast did pay a very high price, added leverage, of course, as well, although still has plenty of cash to fund potential investment in the business. But you're right, Jim. That is sort of what they'd anticipated. Obviously, nobody anticipated the pandemic and the impact that that's having, particularly on theme parks. Listen, when you talk to bankers, their dream, of course, is this idea. Well, maybe you get AT&T to spin out Warner, and then you could spin NBC into Warner and create a giant media conglomerate that could compete with anybody and everybody, including the Netflixes of the world. Doesn't seem likely that's going to happen either. Bankers love to dream these things up. It's not as though Comcast hasn't considered every option and will at least entertain conversations with Trian where they talk about these things. But does anything really come of it? That much is very hard to imagine.
David, remember when we met with that great American, Jeff Bewkes?
Yes.
And I came up with an extremely short-term idea to break the company up? Yes. And he said that's an extremely short-term idea to break the company up. And sometimes I think, well, you don't... We may, if we saw the theme parks working right now, this stock could be at 55.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very hard. The theme parks are fabulous. We know that Disney's down a lot because of the theme park. But look, I totally respect Trian. They do unbelievable work. I love their white papers. I hope we get one. But again, I mean, I don't think you should go after the guys that have created a lot of value long term.
Well, listen, I mean, by the way, we don't know. They may have bought the stock. You know, this stock was in the mid-30s early pandemic. So, and they've been buying the stock for some time. There's their statement.
Well, they got to win.
They believe it's undervalued. They've begun these conversations. Doesn't mean we're going to see a white paper. Doesn't mean we're going to see much of anything at this point. But it is certainly interesting to focus on.
Sure
and it is, of course, there's no doubt that there's got to be frustration when you look at Charter up 26.6% this year as a result of being a pure broadband play. But that is not the strategy that's been embraced at Comcast.